Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of cryptids horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. There's a reason NASA stopped exploring the deep sea. I am a former NASA scientific researcher. My division was in charge of studying deep-sea life, both fauna and flora, in the world's oceans. Here are some facts. 70% of the world is ocean. The deepest part of the ocean is not the Mariana Trench. There's tons of underwater cave systems further down, some quite large. We have not identified every life form down there. Knowing these, let me tell you why NASA fired me and a small team of fellow researchers from the Oceanographic Division, hired completely new personnel, and switched to space exploration. In their defense, I had no interest in continuing my research. Before I begin, I want to say that most of this division actually did study underwater life forms to varying degrees, but most researchers were not involved with the life forms that my team investigated. Therefore, no information about these events has been released to the public, at least to my knowledge. I'm purposely going anonymous here for many reasons, as the U.S. government would prefer to keep this out of the public eye, and people have disappeared for far less in my profession. On an off note, it's deeply tragic what happened recently with the submarine that imploded. I think I'm correct in my suspicion on what caused it, of course, but it's not what the public was told. Anyway, I will now detail a few incidents that I think the public needs to be aware of. Case Study 1. Montessori Oil Rig Diving Incident. I was involved with a study that was sanctioned between NASA and a private corporation to investigate an unknown anomaly. Metal parts at the bottom of the rig had taken damage from an unknown source, and a dive team of 3 was sanctioned to investigate it. The dive did not go well. Something we'd never seen before was down there with the divers. We do not know much about it, but I can tell you what we do know. It resembles an extremely intelligent class of giant cephalopods, more intelligent than any other sea creature ever encountered. They are strong and carnivorous and extremely large. It's theorized they purposely damaged the rig to lure humans deep down. It's unknown what they normally eat or why they sometimes decide to target humans, but it is clear they will not hesitate to eat us. The 3 divers that were attacked had little means to defend themselves. These cephalopods worked in unison, with an extreme understanding of human equipment. One cephalopod removed a diver's air tank from his back, while another removed his fins. Their tentacles have extreme suction and can attach to any object. Dive knives did not appear to damage their bodies, where in the past divers have been able to fight off Humboldt squids and other cephalopods with them. A second diver was choked by a cephalopod from behind, as another created a distracting light display with its body, showing they had an understanding of how humans breathe. Note, they can flash and take on any color, as it suits them, unlike other squids, but normally they resemble a black-blue color, which is almost imperceptible at the deep depths that they live, and explains in part how they are able to avoid discovery. Of course, none of us saw them coming in the research vessel up top, and it was too late to warn anyone. The 2 divers who were attacked perished, and we can only assume they were likely consumed. Amazingly, the 3rd diver was able to use an underwater flare to escape and report back the events in detail. As it stands, fire is this life form's only known weakness. Case Study 2. USS Cyclops Missing Ship Log Recovery. What began as a normal shipwreck investigation has arguably become one of the biggest cover-ups in history. The ship's location has not been released to the public, and I agree that it should be kept secret. The beings that took that ship down should be avoided at all costs. To this day, the public does not know anything other than that a U.S. ship disappeared. Perhaps these creatures can be blamed for other missing ships, though we cannot prove that. This ship had a log that detailed the same beings encountered at the Montessori oil rig. Black-blue giant squid-resembling entities that work in teams and can use tools of human creation. These cephalopods engaged the ship at night in a surprise attack and damaged it beyond repair. They dragged down survivors, including many from atop lifeboats, using their tentacles. They left no trace of their encounter. They are clearly incredibly strong and can easily hold humans underwater, drowning them. There's a theory that they may even derive pleasure in killing, shown by them flashing certain patterns on their bodies immediately upon the taking of a life, although this is still just a theory. There are other incidents that I won't get into here. I don't intend to scare people by bringing this information to light, but I do think diverse and people who are interested in using submersibles to investigate the deep sea need to be warned. These creatures normally stay in very, very deep water, and there's only a few incidents of human interaction. For the common person, they generally pose no threat. While extremely intelligent, they have not shown the ability to create tools, only to use those which humans have made. It is likely that they only go after humans when they are unable to find sufficient food sources in their own environments. We believe them to be just another species of giant squid, albeit an extremely intelligent one. I cannot understand why our government is hiding their existence, as they are just natural sea predators like sharks and orca whales, but whatever the reason, remember this: humans are not the top predators in the deep ocean. Naturally, NASA has chosen to avoid further exploration of the deep sea, for now, to avoid contact with these creatures until the proper measures are put in place. Second story. I found a mermaid in the well. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish between a memory and a dream. When I was a kid, I thought I saw a mermaid. I can still remember her today, but I'm not a child anymore, so I know that's not possible. So, if it ever flashes through my consciousness, I dismiss it as a particularly vivid dream that stayed with me. It wouldn't be unusual. I have a few that haunt me still. I have a short list of certain dreams that I doubt I'll ever be fully rid of, and I always counted the mermaid as one of those. I found her in the well behind our house. It was long dried up when my family bought the property and had a few planks across it so nobody would get hurt. Nobody meaning me primarily. It wasn't a super safe spot, but my parents had always trusted me, and I knew not to play around that area. I usually avoided it completely, but on this day it caught my attention. I was racing past it towards the swings when I noticed there was a hole in the planks. I went over to investigate, more curious than worried that someone had actually fallen in. When I found the mermaid, there were only puddles at the bottom of the deep stone well, and I could tell straight away that if she didn't get to water soon she would die. I called to her asking if she needed help, but she just gurgled, making phlegmy, wet noises at me. I figured she couldn't talk right outside of the ocean. I should have been terrified, but I just felt sorry for her. I couldn't see her very well all the way down there, but I could tell something was very wrong. I ran to get my mom and dad, hoping they'd know how to save her. My mom listened to my story, but didn't really hear what I said. She'd assumed that a kid had gotten itself stuck on our property. My dad watched through the back kitchen window as she ran to the well. I knew he didn't believe me because he didn't look worried at all. My mom screamed. When she came back, I thought she looked sick and worried maybe the mermaid was contagious. She sent me to my room, but I saw her pick up one of the kitchen knives before going back outside. I heard her crying when she came back, but my dad had locked my room from the outside. I didn't know what was wrong, and my dad just kept telling me to go to sleep. When I awoke the next morning, everybody told me that it must have been a bad dream. I didn't believe them at first, but over time that certainty faded. I was 6 years old when I had that dream, and my fascination with mermaids began immediately. Now my dad was a man's man, and his eyes sure did darken when his little boy begged for a mermaid-themed birthday party, but I got my wish, on the condition that afterwards I would only talk about mermaids with my mom and dad. That year I had an Ariel cake and a bouncing castle shaped so that we were jumping in the mouth of Sebastian the crab. It was embarrassing. The other kids teased me, and I didn't blame them. Mermaids might look like that in movies, but I had seen the real thing, and I knew that they looked more like monsters. I tried to complain to my parents, sure that they'd understand why I was upset, but they just sent me to my room for being ungrateful. My life continued, and I stopped talking and eventually thinking about mermaids. It took longer than it should have for me to perceive those events in a way that makes sense to me now as a grown man. I never doubted my family, who had always shown me love. Over time, my imagination had adapted my mermaid into something more family-friendly. I could remember that she should have looked scary, but I didn't remember what specifically was wrong with the blue-scaled feminine creature of my mind. Sometimes you have known the truth all along without accepting it. It sits at the back of your brain stirring, but never enough for you to notice. Until one day you're holding a very old stack of newspaper clippings that you found in the belongings of your recently deceased mother. There's a highlighted article about a string of recent abductions. There's a shoebox dedicated to photographs. One day your kids are downstairs playing with their granddad, and suddenly you remember the mermaid in the well as you look at the tortured body of a woman. Her legs are sewn together, eyes removed. She is skeletal and her skin is gray, although I can tell she was alive when this was taken. There is so much pain on her face. Her hands are hideously broken, and every finger pointing in the wrong direction. There are open sores all over her body. I can see crater-sized holes where her breasts should be, and they are filled with something. The photograph is old and faded, so it's hard to see, but I think it's pebbles. There are dozens of other photographs, but I left the shoebox where it was in the attic. I'd seen enough. I took my kids from my dad without a word, and I left, drove straight for home. I wish I'd known sooner, but I can't change that. My father is an old man now, and I doubt he would survive a jail sentence, but justice needs to be served. There will be a merman awaiting the next child to stumble across that well. Third story. The time I met the bunny man. I love my son. I whisper this affirmation every morning. I have to say it because it reminds me that I have to. Love my son, that is, I have to. Because I don't want to experience what will happen to me if I don't love him. Not after what happened this past Easter. Not after I met the bunny man. You see, I never wanted children, not even my own. It's not that I hate them or find them off-putting or too expensive or whatever the other millennials like me have declared to be their reasons for not making their own. It's that I don't trust them. They're not rational. They just do whatever they want whenever they want, no matter how dangerous it is to them or to those around them. They don't understand the world and how busy we all are in it. I mean, how could they, right? It's just Jimmy and I. He's 6. His father left before he was born, and none of us miss that asshole. But I sure resent not having someone else in Jimmy's life to share the daily, morning to evening burden of raising a kid. My sister helps, but she and her daughter are such a handful on their own. Sometimes it's not even worth asking them. I'm a busy professional woman, which is what I always wanted to be. I'm a lawyer at a small practice in town. Staying here and working at a small firm wasn't my preference, but I couldn't make the move to the big city to make a proper go of it with a baby in tow. God, it was just one stupid night with too many celebratory drinks at the bar, and 9 months later, I'm dealing with the consequences day in and day out for the rest of my life. Now I know how some of my clients feel when they come to me lamenting the one mistake that ruined their lives. Anyway, though I'm not religious in any way, my family would have completely disowned me if I had, chosen to take care of it. I did the hard math and weighed my options. At least if I kept the pregnancy, my generous to a fault family would help raise it, no matter how annoying it be to have them involved. I made the compromise and added single mother to my resume. I know you must think I'm a monster for referring to my young son in such unmotherly terms, but I can't apologize for that. I'm a cold, calculating adult. I never said I was good at this. But look, I am trying. I am trying to grow some motherly feelings. I love my son and will do anything for him. Now I would, at any rate. I should just tell you what happened. This past Easter weekend, my sister, Elizabeth, and her daughter, Jennifer, came to stay with us. She is the complete opposite of me in every way. Elizabeth is the pinnacle of the stay-at-home doting mother. The stress of having her around aside, Jennifer happens to be about the same age as Jimmy, so I thought it would be a relief to have them here to do all the eggs and chocolate nonsense with Jimmy, so that I could just focus on some me time. I even relented a little bit this year and agreed that he could have some of that diabetes-inducing candy the stores in town overflow with each spring. I had been working so many long hours since Christmas on a complicated case that had just closed, and I was exhausted, so I was relieved to have others to manage Jimmy. My only task was to go to the store and stock up however much of the candy was required, and of course, to get some treats for myself. When I returned from shopping and pulled into the driveway of my little bungalow in the woods at the end of Aldwick Village, the kids were playing in the front yard, shouting continuously as they chased each other with sticks. With sticks? I thought, bemused. They were laughing and clearly enjoying themselves, which I suppose was nice to see. Jimmy doesn't really have many friends, I don't think, and I couldn't remember the last time I had seen him so happy. But just watching them reminded me how exhausted I really was. "Hey, Mommy!" "Mommy," Jimmy hollered, waving his arms and stick to get my attention. I sighed and turned to him as I locked the car. "I'm winning," he continued. I sighed again, not bothering to ask how they were keeping score, feeling a headache mounting. I forced a weak smile across my face and hollered back, "That's great," and then, a moment later added, "Honey." I walked quickly into the house, clutching the small bag of discount candy in one hand, while I tried to keep the 2 bottles of white wine from clanking too loudly in my oversized purse in the other. "Hey, sweetheart, how was the store? Busy, I bet, yeah?" Elizabeth sat at the table cutting up construction paper bunny rabbits, hearts, and eggs. She had already made a mess of my newspapers, which had been shredded to fill several baskets. I plopped the meager bag of candy into the middle of the arts and crafts table in my kitchen. "I'll be downstairs," I declared and strode quickly to the door, now clutching my purse of wine to my chest like the life preserver that it truly was. I think she said something or other in reply, but I didn't care. I had a date with a dark basement, a couch, and a bottle. My date must have gone well, because the next thing I remember I was sat in the middle of the couch, my arms splayed out to my sides, my legs stretched out in front of me. My mind was in a fog. I felt loopy, but not drunk. It was dark. Had I slept the whole afternoon? I tried to look around the exceptionally dark, furnished basement, but saw absolutely nothing. I also realized then that I couldn't move my head. I tried to stand up, but my legs were numb. I next tried my arms, which I could see on my lap, but the muscles wouldn't respond. Then a light came on in the center of the room. A bright white spotlight from the ceiling shone down, illuminating a gray folding table and 2 chairs in the middle of my open-concept basement. I don't have a table there, I remember thinking, and why was there suddenly a spotlight? This was the thought I singled out as not making any sense. "Happy Easter, Mommy," I heard my niece Jennifer say as she emerged out of the darkness on my left and ran up to the table. I saw that she was holding something dear, clutched tightly in both hands. I tried to speak, but only managed to move my mouth up and down slightly. In almost instant reply, Elizabeth spoke from the darkness to my right, as she too entered the bizarre stage that had materialized in my office. "Oh, and a happy Easter to you, my love. What do you have there?" Elizabeth cooed as she sat herself down in the chair opposite her daughter. I always hated that stupid mommy voice she put on when talking to her child. So pretentious, so fake, I had always thought. And now she was doing an even more exaggerated version of it. "My egg I painted, see." She proudly presented her hands to her mother, opening them gently. "I painted a smile on it, see?" From my vantage sitting there in the front row, I could see splotches of color all over an ordinary chicken's egg from the carton, as well as clearly the outline of two white dots and what would pass as a smile to a child's unskilled mind. "Oh, it's so beautiful," my sister continued in her silly tone. "It's the nicest one ever. Hey, I thought my kid made one too. It's probably a lot nicer than that piece of crap. Wait, where is Jimmy?" I felt a twinge of guilt. I hadn't yet thought of my son since waking up to this ridiculous farce. What game are they playing anyway? I tried to look around again, and once again realized I couldn't. "You know what happens now?" my sister whisper-shouted with excitement. "What?" Jennifer replied, matching her mother's glee. Both of them turned in unison to face the darkened back of the faux stage. "Why, it's time for the Easter Bunny to judge." I jumped from the sudden new voice in the room. I kid you not. Someone dressed in a full, head-to-toe bunny rabbit outfit hopped into the light between them directly opposite me. Elizabeth and Jennifer both squealed in delight, raising their arms and shaking them as though they had just won a prize. Startled, I screamed, but I think it only came out as a low groan. The person in the bright white bunny suit was tall, much taller than my sister or I, and I'm a statuesque 5'8", nearly 5'10" in heels. Who the fuck is this guy? I yelled with fury in my mind. The bunny costume had a round, pink belly and a goofy grin. Its ears stood straight up but flopped forward slightly at the ends. It held a wicker basket with a red and white checkered cloth covering the top. It sort of hopped over to the table, waving one hand, paw, at my niece before turning to Elizabeth, patting her head. Jennifer cheered, and both her and Elizabeth leaped from their chairs and rushed to hug the bunny man tightly across its wide waist. All the while, the bunny man, or should I refer to as a bunny person? I was loath at the time to refer to it as a bunny rabbit, stared right at me. At that point, my frustration and annoyance at my situation turned to unease. Fun prank or not, whatever was going on in my basement that day was all very strange. "Gee, Jennifer. Gosh, that's a wonderful egg you've got there," it said in that golly gee, shucks parlance you expect from a mascot at a sports game. The voice wasn't quite a man's voice, but also wasn't quite a woman's either. My two ecstatic relatives returned to their seats and eagerly gazed up at the being. Then the bunny man, for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to call it that from now on, placed its basket in the middle of the table while it picked up and carefully examined Jennifer's egg. Such fine craftsmanship. "A fine egg like this can only come from a very good girl," it said while Jennifer smiled proudly. "And, of course, from a very good mommy," it continued, turning back to Elizabeth, who flushed and averted her gaze in embarrassment. "I think it's time for you to get your reward, if that's all right with you, Mommy." Jennifer clasped her hands under her chin in a begging, praying posture. "Oh, please, can I have my reward?" Elizabeth pretended to think about it, her fingers rubbing her chin, drawing out the suspense of the moment. The bunny man mimicked the child's begging posture. "Oh, please, Mommy. What do you say?" Elizabeth laughed. "Of course, my sweet." Both the bunny man and Jennifer threw their hands up in delight. The creature pushed his giant paw into the covered basket and rummaged about for what seemed like far too long before finally, slowly, removing it. I could barely believe my eyes. It had removed a gigantic sheet of chocolate, like the size of a baking sheet, all one giant piece. It was bigger than the basket, so I had no idea how the thing managed to pull that trick off. It handed the sugar monstrosity to my niece, who could barely hold it in her lap. I could see then, as the bright light above bounced off of it, that there was a carving etched all across the top of it, a carving in the shape of a heart. "I love you, Mommy," Jennifer said sincerely before taking a big bite out of the corner. "And you too, Easter Bunny." The spotlight went out, and I was engulfed in total darkness. After a few seconds of silence, I could hear my quickening breath getting shallower. I tried to move my head again and could feel some success. I tried to hear what was going on around me, but all I could was my heartbeat. In the complete darkness, I felt trapped. The darkness closed in on me, seeping into my nose. The smell, putrid, decay, as if suddenly dozens of rats had died in the walls around me, and their combined odor finally permeated the room. I don't know exactly how long I sat there in that black void which my eyes could never seem to adjust to, but when the spotlight came back on, I screamed in terror. The bunny man was sitting on its haunches, its face right in front of my face. Silhouetted by the spotlight and blocking out everything else, its dark maw filled my vision. Its nose was no more than 2 inches from mine. This play is fucking terrible. Get this man away from me, I thought. Angry, yes, but my uneasiness was turning rapidly into full-on fear. The bunny man sniffed. Its nose wrinkled and crinkled up and down and side to side as its whiskers touched my face. As my eyes continued to adjust to the light, I could start to make out its features. The hair on its face seemed real. I could see mucus seeping slowly from its nose and saliva on its whiskers. I looked up into its right eye, and I saw the pupil dilate and zero in on my gaze. I saw the red veins in the whites of its eyes throb and ungulate. This wasn't a bunny rabbit suit. This wasn't some actor perched in front of me. No, this was this was real. Then I smelled its breath again. I felt the air going in and out of its snout and heard the eagerness in its breath. I was in danger. That realization caused me to gasp, sucking in more of that foulness. I choked back vomit. It licked its lips, and I reactively looked down at its mouth. Oh God, its mouth! 2 long pointed teeth filled the front, hanging over its bottom lip. The bunny man widened its grin, revealing rows of jagged, broken, and sharp yellow and black teeth to either side of its front fangs. I know rabbits don't have fangs, but in the same way that this was clearly not a man in a suit, this was clearly no bunny rabbit. This monster had fangs. I shut my eyes as hard as I could, while I mumbled some pleading to let me wake up and forget this nightmare. And then it spoke in a much harsher, malevolent, lispy, and slithering voice. "Happy Easter, Sassamantha." Then I passed out. I felt myself drag backwards along the floor. With a thud, the beast slumped me into the chair Elizabeth had been sitting in. Elizabeth! I suddenly remembered. Where's my Elizabeth? I eked out between sobs. "Oh, she's Fythean," it replied, drawing out its words, letting them dangle in the otherwise deathly quiet. The chair I was in was different from what Elizabeth had sat on. For one, it had arms. Also, It had straps. The bunny man quickly tied down my right wrist. While it did this, I reached out clumsily with my left hand in a half-hearted attempt to slap its face. With incredible reflexes, it snapped at my approaching hand and growled and hissed at my face. She's celebrating the wonderful holiday with her delightful little girl. I didn't bother to struggle, as it then tied down my left hand, pulling the strap painfully tight. That's a reward. Let's see what yours turns out to be. What are you going to do to me? I whispered through panicked tears and gasps. Chuckles emerged from the beast as it stood, satisfied with its work in rendering me physically helpless once again. Jimmy, my boy, why don't you come join us? Oh no, Jimmy. Once again, I had forgotten all about my son. He shuffled slowly into the light from the darkness beyond, his hands cupping his egg, his face hung low. He had none of the excitement Jennifer had, none of the eagerness nor joy. But also, he showed none of the fear I was experiencing. He looked ashamed. The bunny man offered him Jennifer's chair. "Hi, Mom. Happy Easter," he said slowly, quietly, as he slumped down. What's wrong with him? I frantically wondered if he had been drugged as I had clearly been. I've been a really good boy this year, he continued in that slow, unenthusiastic way. Haven't I been good? I couldn't tell if it was a question directed to me or to the monster confining us. Yes, I muttered. And then, after thinking about it honestly, I agreed in my heart that he had been good. When was the last time I said that? Yes, of course you have. Of course, very good. Are you okay, Jimmy? Jimmy didn't seem to acknowledge my reply. He just continued. I got perfect grades in school like you wanted. I nodded rapidly. I never got in trouble. Again, I nodded in agreement. I painted that really nice picture of the family for Christmas. Again, I nodded and smiled eagerly, trying to counteract the tears swelling in my eyes. My mind flashed back to his art class's project. He painted the outline of our house in yellow, and he and his grandma as red stick figures holding hands in the orange yard. I was painted in black crayon, sitting inside my blue car waving at them. It was a beautiful painting, yes, Jimmy, yes. I smiled, as best I could, and wished desperately in that moment that he would smile back. I needed to see some acknowledgement from him to know if he was all right. But you never hung it up. I swallowed a dry, hard lump. I'd told him I'd hang it, but then put it down somewhere and never thought of it again. Shit. Now my head hung low, weighed down by my own shame. The bunny man hissed in shocked disbelief. Not even on the fridge? No, both Jimmy and I whispered. Well, is there something you'd like to say to your mother now, Jimmy? I looked up at my son and deeply into his eyes. He looked deep into mine. I know he did. I had been a shitty parent. At that moment, I was sorry. I was going to make this better once this nightmare was over. I promised myself. Happy Easter, he said finally, dismissively. He flopped his arms on the table, and his egg rolled along toward me, bobbing up and down as it did. It came to a stop right in front of me, only inches from the edge of the table. I gazed down at it. It was painted a simple, solid, bright red, save for a perfectly drawn heart in white that looked up at me. It was truly perfect. He's so very talented. Why had I never told him how talented he was? I stared at that egg and gave up. I cried, and I was too ashamed to look up at my son. After what must have been a full minute of raining tears down on this beautifully decorated Easter egg, I turned my gaze back to my son, to Jimmy, and sincerely said, "Thank you. I love you." He smiled. He finally smiled. Thank God, I prayed for the first time in years. The bunny man picked up the basket and placed it in front of Jimmy before leaning over the table between us. You truly are a good boy, Jimmy. The creature turned its head on a swivel to look straight at me again before continuing. Now, Mommy, shall we give your son his reward? I broke my gaze with my son to look up at the monster. The beast's paws had become darkened claws, like the talons of a vulture. It clutched them together under its chin, which was getting wet from drool. It was smiling at me, I know it was. I looked into those eyes and begged that Jimmy's reward would keep his smile on his face and make this whole ordeal somehow worth it for all the suffering this beast was putting us both through. Jimmy put his hand into the basket. He rummaged around in it for a few seconds, paused, and then a few seconds more. That smile I had been so relieved to see emerge fell from his face. He slowly pulled his hand back and revealed nothing. The bunny man yanked the cloth off the top of the basket, revealing a regular-sized, empty wicker basket. What's going on? I stammered. Where's his reward? Where's his candy? Jimmy sat back in a huff as he folded his arms across his small chest, while confusion, terror, and anger swelled in mine. The bunny man never looked away from me. As it leaned down on the table, a claw on its right paw tapping the plastic table, waiting for me to respond. That tapping, that was the only sound in the room. I turned frantically back and forth from Jimmy's sunken face to the bunny man's gaping maw. Soon it began to shake its head slowly. Do you know where your reward is, Jimmy? The creature asked my son. Jimmy shook his head with exaggerated force. The bunny man raised up his left arm and violently slammed it down on the egg in front of me. It exploded with a pop, instantaneously sending yolk splattering onto my face. Jimmy didn't seem to react, but I yelped and leaped out of my chair as far as I could before my straps resisted. You see, Jimmy, my boy, your mommy here, Samantha, didn't think you deserved a reward. In fact, she doesn't think you deserve anything. That's not true. It couldn't be. I hope Jimmy believed the same. The bunny man continued. She works all the time, doesn't she? She's gone in the morning before you get up, and comes home only after she knows you are all ready for bed. Why? Because she doesn't think you deserve to see her. She doesn't want to see you. That's for sure. She never reads to you anymore. Now does she? After a pause, Jimmy replied, No. I could feel my legs now. I kicked and flailed them all around, suddenly struggling mightily against the straps on my wrists. But it was pointless. The chair itself was bolted to the ground. When little Jimmy brings home a perfect score on his spelling test, eager to see his mother proud of him, Samantha here barely acknowledges it. The beast continued, slowly, in its taunting voice. It sauntered around the table, around behind me. I was frozen. I held my breath. Yes, Jimmy whispered. Mommy works all the time, but surely on weekends she'll have all the time to spend with you, her only child. But when the weekends finally come, when good boy Jimmy wants to go to the park or to the candy store or just to spend time with his mother whom he loves so much, Mommy tells him to be quiet. She just wants to sit on her couch, alone. The lights in the room had started to come up. Those last words the monster spoke truly hurt me, causing me to turn away from Jimmy in shame. What I saw was myself, a version of myself, collapsed on the couch, with one leg outstretched lengthwise and the other dangling to the floor. Jimmy was standing over me, his little hand shaking my shoulder gently. His little whisper of Mommy? Mommy! I felt it in my heart as I watched myself grunt and roll over, turning away from my son. I wondered what occasion this was that was being reenacted, but it didn't matter. It was every occasion, was it not? You know, your mommy never got you a reward. The bunny man hissed as it walked over to the other me and bent to pick up an empty wine bottle toppled over on the floor. The thing waved it in front of its face. But she sure got many for herself. Yes, she did. She always does. Present Jimmy spoke clearly, anger weaving through his words. I jerked back to look across the table at him in fear. I could feel the anger in his words like jagged cuts on my skin. The bunny man said as he walked back to the table, "Don't you think it's time you got sussmething, Jimmy?" "Yes, I do. My boy, my beautiful little boy," hissed, his voice indistinct from that of the bunny man. The bunny man held the empty wine bottle by its neck and brought it down hard on the edge of the table. It shattered, leaving a jagged weapon in the monster's grip. "Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll make it up to you, I promise. I'll make it right, I swear." I moaned and begged and cried pitifully. The bunny man bent down to look me in the face. As it did, it brought its face right up to mine, and I again saw those jagged teeth slick with greedy saliva, its mouth pulled back in a nasty grin. "Yes, you will," it whispered. I felt the jagged end of the bottle pierce my flesh. My chest instantly burned while I also felt cold overtaking me. The hot blood ran down my shirt, my stomach. I gagged. I looked down and saw the bottle was buried above my left breast. The bunny man twisted and turned the makeshift murder weapon, first to the right, then to the left, then back and forth. It dug through my chest. What could I do? The light in the room started to fade again with each twist. Or was it the light in me? Then the feeling of suction permeated through me as this nightmarish creature slowly pulled the bottle's end out. It took the air out of my lungs with it. Finally, it was over, I thought, but I wasn't so lucky. I was transfixed by the broken, bloody bottle and my still beating heart wedged in the end of it. The ice cream cone of a devil. "This belongs to Jimmy," the bunny man whispered. The thing reached over the basket and poured my still beating heart into it. The bunny man, covered in my blood, carefully placed the cloth over the basket again, fussing with the edges to ensure it was neatly and evenly covered. The thing hummed and moved its arms and claws over the basket like a magician over a top hat. I had no fight left. I sat there completely limp, just looking across the table at Jimmy. My son breathed heavily from his mouth, which hung slack. Drool formed at the corners and then overflowed, slowly creeping down his chin and dropping onto his lap. He was so angry and so hungry and so excited. The bunny man finished its ritual with a clap of its paws. While it looked at me, it gingerly slid the basket toward Jimmy. My son, in a frenzy, threw his hands into the basket, smiled a maddening grin of delight, and pulled out a large chocolate egg. The spotlight glinting off its smooth surface showed an etching of a heart just like that which he had painted so perfectly onto the egg he had given me minutes before. "Thank you," the child who had been my sweet, loving son whispered in a mocking tone of glee. He opened his mouth and pierced the egg like a vampire latching onto a woman's throat. I felt my body fading away. I couldn't keep my eyes open. I was passing out for good. But I heard him say the words I dreaded hearing. "Happy Easter, Mommy." "Yes, good." "You deserve that, Jimmy," I conceded. My vision started to blur as what little energy I had drained away. I hadn't noticed, but the bunny man had been gathering up the bits of the shattered egg on the table, patiently drawing its claw across the table to pull the yolk. When it had gathered a claw full, it pushed the yellow, red, and white mess into the gaping wound in my chest. This brought me back to the present as I gasped and mumbled, Why now?" Ignoring my sounds, it picked up more viscera and detritus from the floor and pushed that too into my chest, sending waves of stinging pain throughout my body. Now, Samantha, dearest, you deserve your reward too." The creature delicately removed from the bottle the flap of skin that had once covered my heart. "Oh, gee, I do love arts and crafts," The bunny man spoke in that wholesome voice it had used with Elizabeth and Jennifer as it carefully placed the loose skin over the wound. The thing slowly licked a claw and ran it along the edges of the wound, each time burning my skin. As its salvia mixed with my body, I shut my eyes to the pain. When the burning sensation began to fade, I opened them to see that the skin had fused in place. I looked up to see the bunny man licking all the claws on its paws, sopping up my blood eagerly. I woke to the sound of my own shrieking and the discomfort of falling with a thud onto the cold basement floor. I flailed, clutching at my chest. Terrified, I couldn't catch my breath as I looked down to examine my chest wound. I saw what was there, and I shuddered, grasping my blouse closed. I tried to calm my breathing as Elizabeth hurried down the stairs, calling after me. "Samantha! Samantha! What's wrong? Are you okay?" "What's happened?" she called as I lifted myself back up onto the couch. What time is it?" I asked erratically. Confused, she replied, "About 2:30. Yeah, you came down here a few hours ago, and then HHH, you were shouting, so I nearly dropped my basket." I quickly surveyed my surroundings, my ordinary home office. No spotlight hung from the ceiling, no plastic tables, and certainly no chair with straps bolted to the ground. I shot a glance down to the floor beside the couch, and there were my 2 bottles of wine, unopened. I must have passed out from just exhaustion alone. "Are you all right then? You look rattled." I saw that Elizabeth had been carrying something in her hands. A basket with a cloth napkin that looked all too familiar. She replied something to the effect that she had been gathering up the eggs the children had made that morning, but I wasn't listening too closely. Anxious but desperately curious, I nervously reached out and peeked beneath a corner of the fabric. My eyes caught just a hint, just a little bit, for only a second, of a bright, red egg with a perfect drawing of a heart. A perfect egg made my perfect son, still covering my chest, but trying not to look too ridiculous or suspicious in front of my sister. I took a deep breath, realized what I needed to do next, and walked purposefully toward the stairs. That day, I spent nearly $500 on all the biggest and most elaborate Easter treats I could find, completely cleaning out both of Aldwick's grocery stores. Jimmy spent that Sunday and Monday on a sugar high. We didn't finish it all then, but we have slowly been working our way through it since, taking a piece out of the freezer each, and every time Jimmy brings home a score on a test he's proud of, or paints a lovely picture we agree should be hung on the fridge at once. Sometimes we forget all about the candy and just celebrate with a hug. I always remember to congratulate him and to tell him how much I love him each time I do, so I rub my heart beneath my breast. I took to researching the origins of the Easter Bunny. I found it referenced in old Germanic lore. The popular early bunny legends had it as a benign creature that judged children's behavior, like another Santa Claus. Good children got sweet treats, bad children didn't. But this wasn't true. I knew it wasn't. I drove to the university. I went deeper and further back into the arcana. It turns out there are references to a creature that matched the general description that came out at the beginning of spring. Not to judge the children, but their parents. Good parents were rewarded with good kids, and bad parents, well, so as I said in the beginning, I am learning to love my child with all my heart and all my mind and all my soul. And it's working. I'm definitely better. But I'm a work in progress. Anytime I slip and stumble in my determination, I try to catch myself by locking myself in the bathroom, taking off my shirt, and gazing at the scar on my chest. A scar in the shape of a perfect heart. 4th story. I believe in Go Man. Go Man lives. I know it. I remember the first time I heard a story about him. I didn't believe it. Ghosts I believed in. Spirits, sure. But a half man, half-goat creature that wandered the woods and terrorized people. This was too much, even for my fertile imagination. My grandfather grew up in northern Ontario, where his family worked in the mining industry. He was the first one who ever told me about Go-Man. One bitterly cold winter, when he was just a boy, a huge snowstorm blew through the area. He remembered at dinner time his father talking about how, when he was making his way home after gathering some firewood in the woods, he saw in the distance the figure of a man walking through the forest, bent against the wind and snow. He had called to him, but received no answer. Everyone thought it was a wandering vagrant, or someone who had gotten lost as the storm blew up and was searching for shelter. That night, though, Grandpa said that his family had woken up and seen what looked like a man walking around the house, looking in the windows. Come morning, they went to check it out. Instead of fresh human boot or shoe prints in the snow, they saw cloven hoof prints. And that's where the story ended. His story anyway. Mine had yet to begin. My grandparents had moved a couple of hours away from that area, and I grew up living next door to them in a gold mining town. I'm an only child, but my best friend was my cousin, Tanya. She lived in the same town. We'd spend every summer in the woods around my grandparents and my house. Those woods had a magical quality to them. They felt extremely safe and wholesome, like the 100-acre wood from Winnie the Pooh or something. We'd play for hours in those woods, pretending we were Celtic princesses or pioneer women. But one day, we wandered a little too far. This was northern Ontario, so our entire town was surrounded by bush and rock, being part of the Canadian Shield. Not far beyond the safe, happy-feeling woods behind my grandparents' house was the lake the town had taken its name from. When I was little, it was a beautiful spot, but the mine had drained to do some exploration. A chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, and our parents had always warned us not to go near there. It could be really dangerous. Tanya was a show-off. At 16 years old, she was only 1 year ahead of me. But boy did she lord it over me. She was petite, with graceful curves, blonde hair, blue eyes, and a flawless complexion. Boys fawned over her. I, on the other hand, was an awkward 15-year-old with thick, long brown hair, glasses, braces, and an acne problem. She was sweet and always told me I was pretty and helped me to feel better about myself. But she made no secret that she thought she was drop-dead gorgeous. And she was right. Tanya was also a lot more worldly than me. I was bookish, naive, and didn't have experience with boys. She'd already had several boyfriends and had tried smoking and drinking, two things I refused to do. So, it didn't surprise me when she said we should travel down to the fence that bordered the drained-out lake and flash the few guys who would be sitting in their diggers. Sorry, I don't know the right word for the equipment they used, that were working there. EW10, no? I said, they're like 40 years old, probably. So what? I like older men, she said, and started off through the dense forest towards the lake. Yeah, I'm sure you do, I said, rolling my eyes. I sure as hell wasn't going to be flashing my barely developed breasts at some random older guys, but I wasn't going to let Tanya claim to be the daring and brave one and go on her own either. I've always been sensitive, but I was shocked that Tanya couldn't feel the palpable change in atmosphere when we left the higher ground of the woods that were closer to my grandparents' house to scramble down some of the rocky forest that ran down closer to the lake. I thought maybe it was a change in altitude at the time, but the woods suddenly seemed quieter, stuffier, and danker. Tanya was rambling on about her latest conquest, Jordan, a boy from grade 12, when we finally came into view of the lake behind the fence. She stopped in her tracks and looked back at me with a disgusted look on her face. EW, what the hell is that smell? She asked me, her pert nose wrinkling. It smells like ass? Ugh, I don't know, I replied. My nostrils were being assaulted by a smell I had never experienced before, something pungent and animalistic and wrong. Maybe there's some kind of bear cave or wolf den nearby, I added. Maybe it's coming off of the lake, she said, and we moved closer to the fence to look through. My grandparents had this large, two-story brick house right at the edge of town. The house was on a hill, so that walking in the front door, the main floor was flush with the ground, but when you walked out French doors that led off of the breakfast room onto the deck outside, you were a good story up off the ground. And from that vantage point, you could see the drained-out lake surrounded by forest. Usually, there were one or two bulldozers working there at any given time of the day. But today, there was nothing. No bulldozers, no workers. That's odd, I said. Where are the workers? Even the bulldozers are gone. What day is it? I asked Tanya, thinking maybe it was a holiday or something and the guys didn't have to work. It's Monday, she said, raising her eyebrows. Who knows, though? Maybe the bulldozers had to be serviced. Let's walk around some more. Now that we're here, the smell was still there, and we were by no means getting used to it, but our sense of adventure won out over our sense of disgust at the musky, foreign aroma. We walked in silence around the fence line, and every twig that snapped underneath our feet sounded super loud, echoing out across the empty expanse of what used to be a crystal-clear lake. We couldn't hear any birds or other animals scurrying around in the forest, but neither of us said anything, because before we had a chance to, we were confronted by something deeply unsettling. What the hell is that? I asked as we turned a bend. It looked like a huge, wrenching hole had been torn into the fence, which was splayed open. Why is there a hole in the fence? Probably teenagers coming to part here, Tanya mumbled, but I could tell she felt scared. We walked to the hole in the fence, and were hit with the same scent that had been lingering around us like a ton of bricks. Tanya gagged and hunched over, trying not to vomit. I must have had a stronger stomach. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and went to look more closely at the fence. We've got to get out of here, I said, seeing dark, wiry fur stuck in some of the broken fence. I think a bear or something has been here. I didn't hear anything from Tanya, but I was too busy looking at the fence. My heart dropped as I saw a streak of blood in the mud just inside the empty lake. No, not a streak, a trail of blood. I don't know what came over me, but I knew I had to follow that trail. I looked back, and Tanya was sitting, pale-faced with her arms wrapped around her, on a fallen log by the fence. There's blood on the ground, I said, my voice echoing nervously on the lake. Blood on the ground, she mumbled in a strange, monotone voice. What the hell? Yes, genius. And I'm going to figure out where it came from, see if anyone is hurt, I snapped back. Tanya was a notorious girly girl, and I figured she was in shock from seeing it too. Stay there, and if I'm not back in a few minutes, go for help. Help, she said, tilting her head and looking at me with blank eyes. I shuddered, but turned to follow the trail. I had only walked a few paces into the drained-out lake when the going got pretty rough. It dipped down pretty steeply from where I had entered the fence through the hole that was torn into it, and about 20 yards off I could see one of the bulldozers that was usually busy working flipped over onto its side. The trail of blood I was following got more saturated. Instead of streaks here and there were puddles. My stomach was churning. I had stopped in my tracks, about 10 meters from the bulldozer, when I saw a man's boot sitting in a puddle of blood. I suddenly realized that I was a 15-year-old girl, who was all of 5'3" and weighed 110 pounds, completely unarmed and incapable of defending herself against whatever had left all that blood. Suddenly, I felt panicked. I decided it must have been a sick bear or wolf who had picked off one of the workers. I remember my parents telling me that wolves and bears will usually leave you alone, and that only the sick ones ever go after humans. I turned and ran up the embankment into the opening in the fence. But Tanya was gone. Titania, I called out, not too loudly, for fear that whatever crazed, rabid animal that was out there would hear me and find me. Where are you? Stop screwing around. I searched the area for her, but there was no sign of her. The sun was starting to set. I figured that she got tired of waiting for me and freaked herself out and headed home without me. I was almost as mad at the thought of that as I was scared. But then I noticed something. The smell was gone. The smell from before, that horrible, acrid smell, was completely gone. The wind hadn't changed, nothing had. But the woods now smelled like woods. And there was bird song. Weird. I walked as quickly as I could back to my grandparents' house. And when I went in, everyone was sitting down to dinner, including Tanya. I quickly washed up and joined them at the table. You'll never believe what Tanya and I found out in the woods, I said. Around the table sat my grandparents, my mom and dad, and Tanya's dad. And Tanya, who was looking at me wide eyes and her head tilted oddly to the side. You were in the woods? Grandma said, as she spooned some boiled potatoes onto my plate. I hope you didn't go too far. That's the thing, I said, looking at my parents and then hastily away. We want to look through the fence at the lake. What? My father demanded, his face like thunder. That's so dangerous. There are sinkholes all over that place. I know, I'm sorry, but you need to listen, I replied. No need to listen, Tanya mumbled. What? I said, turning to look at her. She smiled wanly at me, got up from the table, and left the room. Just what is going on? Tanya's dad demanded, glaring at me. The adults seated around the table were all looking at me with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. I burst into tears. Something terrible happened down there, I said, and my mother came to put her arms around me. Hysterically, I told them about how we found a hole in the fence and how I had seen blood in the mud and a man's boot in a tipped-over bulldozer. And then my mother ushered me from the room as my grandfather picked up the phone to call the police. We didn't finish having dinner there. My parents and I drove home, and I went to bed early. I was shaken from the day and entirely exhausted. They told me the police may want to talk to me in the morning, but not to worry about it. I knew they were too scared about what had happened to lecture me. The next day, my grandparents came over and told me that the police had searched the grounds and had found the hole in the fence, but nothing else. There was no blood to be found, no boot, no bulldozer. They had asked me if my imagination had gotten away with me, and I swore that it didn't. But I saw the concern in their eyes as they looked at themselves and me and back to each other. I stopped talking about it, and they stopped asking. Later that day, Tanya came over. My parents had let her in, and she flounced into my room and flopped onto my bed. She punched my arm and said, "Why the hell did you leave me on my own in the woods yesterday?" "What? You left me," I said, looking at her confusedly. "When I got back, you were gone. I wasn't even 5 minutes." "No, I sat there waiting for you," she said, her eyebrows raised. "I waited until after dark, and you didn't come out. Then I went back to Grandma and Grandpa's. They said that you'd left with your parents. You're shitting me, and I don't like it. I've already been through enough." I snapped at her, feeling sick to my stomach. "I'm not shitting you, I swear," she said, sounding scared. "Something weird is going on. Last night when I got back, Grandma and Grandpa and Dad seemed upset. I figured they were mad at me for being gone so long, so I apologized. Dad said to relax and that I'd only been away from the table for 10 minutes. Then he told me about how they called the police and how your parents had taken you home. What the fuck is going on? I felt like someone had thrown ice water over me. Tanya, you had dinner with us last night. You were at the house when I got back, and it wasn't dark yet. We sat there in silence. We couldn't figure it out. Tanya asked if she could sleep over, and our parents agreed. We watched Friends reruns on my TV until we fell asleep in my double bed. It was the smell that woke me up. That same horrible metallic musky smell, like sweat and wet dog and blood and smoke all in one. And then I heard it, a tap, tap, tap on my window. I sat slowly up in bed, reached for my glasses on the bedside table, and put them on. Outside my house, looking in my window, was Tanya. She had a wide smile on her face. Her head was tilted to the side, and every couple of seconds, she was vibrating. I looked down beside me in the bed, and there was Tanya, fast asleep. By the time I had shaken her awake, it was gone. We turned the TV back on and watched game shows until the morning light streamed through my window. I went to look outside my bedroom, which was at the front of the house, above my mother's rose garden. There, in the damp soil, I saw hoof prints. 5th story, Goatman's Bridge. Recently, I visited a place near my town that has a lot of paranormal activity. The actual name of the bridge is Old Alton Bridge and is located in Denton, Texas. I had just heard stories from classmates back when I was in high school about how creepy the bridge was, but it wasn't until 2 or 3 days ago that I visited it for myself. Before I go any further with the story, though, I would like to apologize for how lengthy this post may get. The story, legend tells of a black goat farmer who moved his family to a residence just north of the bridge. A few years later, Oscar Washburn was known as a dependable, honest businessman. North Texans endearingly began to call him the Goat Man. But the success of a black man was still unwelcome to many, and Klansmen and the local government turned to violence after he displayed a sign on Alton Bridge, "This way to the Goatmans." In August 1938, Klansmen crossed the bridge and kidnapped Washburn from his family. They hung a noose on Old Alton Bridge, and after securing it around his neck, threw him over the side. When they looked down to see if he had died, the noose was empty. In a panic, they returned to his family home and slaughtered his wife and children. The first night I was there, my brother and a friend of mine met up with a group of ghost hunters called Haunted Texas Paranormal Group, or something of the sort, and they told us the story of how the bridge came to be known as Goatman's Bridge. After I came home, I researched the name of the bridge on Google and came up with plenty of information. There are several websites dedicated to the bridge and tell the stories and personal experiences of people that have been to it. While we were there, the group of ghost hunters decided to show us just how serious it all was. They grabbed a flashlight and placed it in the spot where Oscar Washburn was lynched and asked if he could show us all his presence by turning off the flashlight. To my amazement, the flashlight turned off. I was watching intently as the light started getting dimmer and dimmer until there was nothing but darkness. To me, the scariest part was when he was asked if he was angry at the people who had murdered him and if he thought they should be brought to justice. Without hesitation, the flashlight came back on and seemed to be brighter than before. Last night, I was back at Goatman's Bridge, and I decided to go prepared with my own flashlights and camera. It was raining, so our stay wasn't for very long, but I managed to capture something odd in one of the pictures. There seems to be some sort of thick mist on the right side corner of the picture. At first, I thought it was my breath, but it wasn't that cold outside, and even if it had been, the wind would have carried it out, so the mist shouldn't be so dense. If anyone is interested in seeing the picture, let me know and I will post it as soon as I can. We also heard strange noises coming from the side of the bridge. We were alone, unlike the night before, so we knew it couldn't have been other people there. There are woods somewhere along the bridge, and it is said that Oscar has been seen there at night. The weather was too shitty for us to walk the trails, but as soon as it gets better, I will be returning to the bridge.